Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Stone Chapel Podcast. I'm David Capes. The Stone Chapel Podcast is part of the Church Leaders Podcast Network. We're dedicated to providing resources for church leaders who are trying to sort out a way through this culture. A lot of people these days are into deconstruction, that is, deconstructing their faith and worldview. It may be a new term for you, but it's been around for a while. Primarily, college professors have often engaged in deconstructing the faiths and worldviews of their students without stopping to put something, really anything, in the deconstructed space. Dr. Melissa Cain Travis is doing something about that. She and a co-author are writing a book entitled The Reconstruction Project, Rediscovering Truth and Rebuilding Faith. It's a Broadman and Holman publication, published in February 2026. Their desire is to answer some of the charges leveled against the Christian faith these days, charges that question whether Christianity is actually good for the world or is it irrelevant altogether. It's a book of 12 chapters that could serve as standalone studies, but more about that coming up. So today, apologist, writer, teacher, and scholar, Dr. Melissa Cain Travis on the Stone Chapel Podcast.
Hi, I'm Dr. Melissa Cain Travis, Assistant Professor of Christian Apologetics at Houston Christian University.
Dr. Melissa Cain Travis. Melissa, good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
This is your first appearance on the podcast.
It is.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you so much.
All right. We always like to introduce people to whoever's going to be on the podcast. So for people that don't know Melissa Cain Travis, who is she?
I am an assistant professor of Christian apologetics at Houston Christian University. I'm newly back after being away for 5 years. I taught here before for about 7 years, and now I'm back and very happy to be so. My husband and I have lived in Texas since 1999. We moved here as newlyweds, and we have loved Texas, and that's why we decided to stay. We're originally from North Carolina. We have 2 grown sons, one 22 and one about to turn 19.
22, wow.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. He is a senior at Sam Houston State studying software engineering. And then our younger is now doing an apprenticeship with his dad. They are Lamborghini mechanics.
Lamborghini mechanics.
Yes.
Wow. That's pretty highly specialized.
Yeah, it is very specialized, and they love it. We have a cat named Johannes Kepler.
I love it.
He's a big, fluffy Maine Coon, black and white kitty, named after my intellectual hero.
Hey, you're co-writing a book entitled The Reconstruction Project, Recovering Truth and Rebuilding Faith.
Yes.
Exciting project. Who's your co-author?
My co-author is Dr. Andrew Ike Shepherdson. He lives in the Denver area. And then a friend of ours, Dr. Doug Groteis, wrote the foreword for our project, and we were very honored by that.
I ask everybody if they've written a book or they're writing a book or working on a project, the big idea, the thesis, as it were, of the book. So what's the big idea that is in the book?
I guess the big idea is that the apologetics conversation has changed a lot over the past decade and a half. Ike and I have both observed this. We've gone from having to respond to the so-called new atheism arguments for the existence of God.
That was like 20 years ago.
Right. So the new atheist arguments that were all about how there was no good evidence for the existence of God, or all religion is evil, or what have you. And now the conversation has turned more towards questions about the goodness of the Christian faith. So people are seeking meaning, value, and purpose in their lives, and some of them have become more open to asking spiritual questions. And Ike and I are both convinced, as are a lot of our associates in the apologetics world, more broadly speaking, that the conversation really needs to adapt and place more emphasis on those kinds of topics. Meaning of life, happiness. things like that.
If you were teaching apologetics today and you were just doing the old questions, you would not be up to really what's happening in culture.
Right. I wouldn't say that some of those topics aren't still very important. And I mean, obviously, my specialty is science and faith, and I still very much believe we need to be prepared to answer questions about the intersection of science, faith, and philosophy. And people still have those kinds of objections. I just think that the questions we're hearing more frequently, and really the questions that matter most to us as human creatures, are not those types of questions. We're looking for spiritual fulfillment. All of us are, by virtue of being made in the image of God. Those related topics are the ones that Ike and I tried to emphasize in the book, while also pulling in topics that are what you might call classical apologetics topics, like the harmony of science and faith and things like that. Ike, having skill as a pastor, he has brought in a beautiful pastoral tone to our chapters, and we've both contributed intellectual rigor to the topics, and our hope is that the book will serve seminary students and university students in a classroom in a context where they may only get one textbook on Christian apologetics. I won't call it a complete one-stop shop, but it is comprehensive enough and treats the topics at a depth sufficient for someone to have confidence in having conversations around the 12 topics that we treat.
Now, it's not yet published as the time we're recording. When will it be published?
The release date is February 1st of this coming year.
So 2026, early in 2026. Let's go ahead and go over those 12 topics you were talking about. And I bet you there'll be several that have a hook in them for whoever's listening right now.
Yeah. As I said, this is a book that we intended to be used in a classroom. And so one thing we tried very hard to do with the topics that we cover is make them pretty standalone. So if you are someone looking to adopt a textbook for a course, if you're just a Christian lay person who wants to learn more about these topics, you don't have to read the chapters in order. We love that. You know, if there are just a couple of these topics that are pressing for you right now because you're in an evangelistic conversation with a friend or a family member, then the book will serve you well. You don't have to pick it up and read it cover to cover to be prepared on that topic.
So you could do chapter to chapter.
Yeah, you could do chapter to chapter and you don't have to read them in order.
Okay.
All of our chapters are phrased as an objection to the Christian faith. Chapter 1 is Christianity is unnecessary for a good, meaningful life. Objection number 2, God and human suffering are incompatible. Number 3, Christians are hypocrites. Number 4, Christian ministries are abusive. Number 5, Christianity is misogynistic. Number 6, Christians want to control women's bodies. Number 7, Christianity's intolerance has spawned violent crusades and inquisitions. Number 8, Christianity is colonialist. Number 9, Christianity is anti-LGBTQ. Number 10, Christianity has obstructed scientific progress. Number 11, Christianity is anti-science. And number 12, evolutionary theory has ruled out a creator.
So why did you state these as objections?
Because of the general ethos of the book. We're calling it the Reconstruction Project, especially to appeal to those who may be going through what's popularly known now as a deconstruction journey, or those who have had a deconstruction journey in the past, but maybe now they're inching their way back towards questions surrounding religious faith. And so these are objections because when you hear these stories or you read memoirs from people who have left Christianity behind, that's the kind of phrasing we hear sometimes. Often that's how they frame their reasons. They say, well, these are the objections I had and no one had good responses. And so bit by bit, my faith deconstructed.
A lot of college students go off with faith and they find a professor or they find somebody that loves to deconstruct, but they don't help them do the reconstruction.
Right.
They love to tear things down,
Yeah.
But they're not very helpful about, well, what do we put in its place, or do we put nothing in its place, or is it just all up for grabs?
Right, I agree. And that is even happening at universities that identify themselves as Christian universities. So I was an undergrad from 1995 to 1999, and I studied at a Christian liberal arts institution, and my professors were all, at the time, conservative Christian believers. But I even remember having fellow students that began to wrestle with their faith because in like the canon and criticism class, they would hear things that they had never heard before and that really shook their understanding of what Scripture is, for example. But exactly as you're saying, these professors didn't help them come out of the class with a cohesive and confident view of Scripture. They just said, okay, let's tear it apart and look at all the different theories for how we ended up with a canon, for example.
Okay. So you're asking a lot of now kind of socially conscious kinds of questions in this as well.
Yeah, those are first and foremost in the minds of a lot of people, especially those who are Christians who have family members struggling with things like sexual orientation and gender identity, or who are really persuaded by arguments coming out of the field known as critical theory, or I guess I should say philosophy known as critical theory, and just at a loss for how to have those kinds of conversations. But then also people on the outside of the faith who are looking at Christianity and have these deep-seated misunderstandings about what it is Christians believe and Christian attitudes towards them based on whatever community that they identify with socially.
You begin with the statement, Christianity is really irrelevant to having a meaningful, purposeful, good life.
Right.
You begin there because that seems to be a very prevalent kind of question. We talked earlier about a course at Yale. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the most well-attended course in the history of Yale University, and this was true up until at least a year ago, and it's probably still true. I looked around online the other day for some statistics surrounding this course to see if it still holds the record. I believe that it does, but I couldn't find definitive information on that. But at the time we wrote the book, it held the record for the most well-attended class in all of Yale University's history, and it was on happiness. So that demonstrated that the idea that there could be a way to learn how to be happy struck a massive chord with these university-age students. From that, all sorts of publications and websites and other books, and even a scientific field that's emerging called the science of happiness. And so this just goes to show that this is a deep-seated need among humanity. You know, believers and non-believers alike are drawn to that which they believe gives their life meaning, value, and purpose. And so I wanted that chapter to be first and foremost because I think everyone can relate to these existential angst issues.
Well, at Harvard, they've started this Human Flourishing Project, which I think is very adjacent to what you've just here described, because the language of flourishing and human flourishing is sort of all over the academy right now.
Right. And so in this particular chapter, I do a little bit of a survey of the lay of the land in this regard and talk about why Christianity is the ultimate and the only grounding for a good and happy, flourishing life as a human being.
Yeah. Well, I remember reading some about that in C.S. Lewis years ago, and there's other writers, too, that have taken that up as well. But I think that's a brilliant way to begin the book, because there's the search for significance that everybody has.
Right.
And we want to be significant. We don't want our lives to be just a tragic accident, cosmic accident.
Right.
We're not here for anything else other than just the fact that the cosmos just happened to throw these pieces together. A nod to fate, as it were.
Right.
Fate is sort of ruling everything. So you wrote some of the chapters, and your co-author wrote some of the chapters as well, but you wrote on top of each other, which I always find significant. You always sort of comment on each other because you want it to be a joint book. Was there a particular chapter that you found the hardest to write to write together?
I would say there was, and the chapter that was probably the biggest challenge for us was chapter 7, and that's the one that addresses violent crusades and inquisitions.
Okay.
It wasn't that we disagreed on the content of the chapter. It's that Ike is so passionate as a pastor in helping people understand that, yes, Christians too are sinful and Christians too fail, and we've made massive mistakes in some parts of history. And let's talk about what Scripture tells us and how things should have happened and so forth, which I think is tremendously valuable, yes. And I'm more inclined to say, let's look at the historical record and let's ask questions like, well, what really precipitated these inquisitions and crusades? What really went on during these periods? Mm-hmm. Is it as bad as all of the pop culture talking points that you hear surrounding
Well, that's what I'm wondering,
things?
because pop culture sometimes, there's the writing of history, and then there's the rewriting of history, and then the rewriting of history. And so a lot of times we don't really know the whole story.
Right. There are little pieces that are plucked out and emphasized, and the whole thing becomes distorted. Mm-hmm. That was our challenge, to say, okay, within this many thousands of words for this one chapter, how can we get plenty of both and serve our readers really well? And we both learned a lot from researching and writing that chapter, and things I'm very glad to know now about the messiness of human history and the messiness of the church having to be in this world and interacting with different groups of people from different faiths and political dynamics and all the things that just make things difficult and messy to navigate.
And human history is messy, isn't it?
It
when
is.
you look at it, I think it was Richard John Newhouse that said something like, violence, when justified, is not an option but a sad duty.
Yeah.
That there are times that violence might be the right response to something.
Right.
Which seems to be against, to some degree, at least on the surface, some things Jesus talks about. But when you look at the historical record and what happens in history, sometimes maybe violence is justified.
Yeah, right. And so the chapter goes on to talk about who was defending who was fighting who invaded first, who was taking back for just causes. And there's not a whole lot you can cover in one chapter of a book, but we feel that we've addressed the topic rigorously and pastorally, and we hope it really does serve the readers well.
More recently, I think the charge of Christians are hypocrites, or the Christian leadership at least can be and has been abusive to people. Those are a little bit more current, obviously, than some of the other things.
Right. And Ike, as I said, he does such a tremendous job coming at it from a pastoral perspective and helping Christian readers see that some of this we need to simply, in all humility, acknowledge that some terrible things have happened and do happen within the context of the church. Yeah. And there is a lot that needs to be repented for in that regard.
Right.
But we've got to always come back to, what does Scripture teach about these things? And it gives us the grounding to actually condemn it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so how should we be behaving in the church?
I have a rabbi friend that says it this way: if people violate their faith, you can't blame the faith itself.
Right, exactly.
You can only blame the people who have violated the faith.
Right.
So it's not the faith that is the problem. It is the people who are not living by the faith.
Exactly.
So I think that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. Now, a lot of your focus has been on science and the sort of the latter chapters of the book that deal with issues of science, with evolution, that Christianity is anti-science, that kind of thing. I've often thought of science sort of as an abstraction because to some degree, science never seems to be settled very long on any one question. This might be current right now, and then 50 years later they're saying something else, and it seems to be a moving target. So is that part of the problem? Is it Christianity against scientists rather than Christianity against science?
Well, I delve into the philosophy first and foremost to talk about the different perspectives that we're coming at the discipline from. So a Christian is coming at the discipline of science, broadly speaking, from a theistic worldview in which mind is fundamental to all existence. There is a mind behind all things, the mind of God. Whereas the non-theist is coming at the discipline of science, broadly speaking, from a non-theist framework, such that matter and energy and the laws of nature are the fundamental thing.
And the only thing, really.
And the only thing, right? So we'll often hear the term materialism or naturalism associated with that view. So I talk about the conflict really being at this fundamental level. The conflict is not that science and religion are at odds. They're not. It's these underlying philosophies that are at odds. But as you said, science is one of these fields that is constantly changing. Things that seem settled 10 years from now will not be so settled or will be completely different. This is one of the things that C.S. Lewis talked about in an essay entitled Christian Apologetics. He said, do not pin your apologetic on one scientific finding or another, because tomorrow you might find the rug pulled out from under you, because then it's replaced with a different scientific theory. My perspective on the science and faith conversation is that we really have to have the conversation at the philosophical level first and ask questions. How is the data pointing? When we look at it holistically, do things seem to be pointing more towards mind being fundamental to nature, or more towards blind matter and motion being more fundamental to nature? And this is where we can just have some, what I call mere creation arguments about whether we do see design. Do we see evidence of rationality in the natural order? And then from there, we can talk about things like theories of origins, theories on the origin of the cosmos, the origin of life, the origin of consciousness, the origin of human creatures.
As you were talking a moment ago, you were talking about the need for us to begin at the philosophical level. What I want to raise now is a question that comes to mind, because even people who begin with a kind of a theistic perspective that God's mind and God's creative design is behind everything will still operate at a methodological level as naturalists. In other words, they don't factor God necessarily. As they're testing the efficacy of some drug, they don't put in a God factor.
Right.
They usually will operate methodologically as if matter is all there is. And that's why they sometimes come at the same scientific questions the same way, because their method is a natural method, but they still have a different philosophical bent that God's mind is behind all design.
Right. Methodological naturalism is one of those things that I like to call a general and better loosely held rule of thumb when it comes to the actual practice of science. Because as you said, with the vast majority of scientific investigation, we're not asking questions that have those sorts of ultimate existential answers. So it's one thing to talk about where did the universe come from, but then it's a completely different thing to talk about what's the genetic sequence of a koala bear. So for the vast majority of scientific conversations, God doesn't even come into the conversation, not because he's being excluded, but just because that's not the kind of thing being investigated. We're not talking about issues of ultimate origins. I think a lot of Christian believers who are, I guess you could say, hardcore, committed methodological naturalists in their scientific field, I think a lot of them operate on a fear of either committing or being accused of committing the God of the gaps fallacy. And I think that they can err on the side of caution where that's concerned, because they want to be rigorous in their science. They want to be respected in their scientific field. And so they stick very stringently to this methodological naturalism. But the problem with that is there are going to be areas such as ultimate origins, or like you said, the origin of specified complex information in genetic codes, where we're seeing this intersection of matter and rationality. And we can't just sweep the rationality portion under the rug. We have to ask the big philosophical questions. Well, why is it that we're seeing bona fide digital information in this genetic coding? We have to start asking questions that are pointing beyond. And so I think that we have to be open to asking those kinds of questions and be open to answers that bring in the concept of intelligent design. Be willing to follow the evidence wherever it happens to lead. Don't box yourself in to methodological naturalism.
And I think that humility has got to move in at some point to say that there are limits to what science can tell us. There are limits to what any discipline can teach us.
Right.
And just to say that we will allow the evidence, as you said, to go where it will and where it can, and make good interpretations of that evidence. But at the same time say, well, I can't speculate beyond that because my evidence doesn't speak to anything beyond that.
Right, right.
So really fascinating idea for a book. All this deconstruction going on, and you guys are here to help us reconstruct.
Thank you.
Broadman and Holman's going to publish it. The book is entitled The Reconstruction Project, Recovering Truth and Rebuilding Faith. And Andrew Shepherdson.
Yes.
Melissa Cain Travis, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. My pleasure.
We're featuring some of the faculty from Houston Christian University because of our partnership with them. So grateful to run back into Melissa Cain Travis. Their School of Theology has some great faculty, and we partner with them in theological education. You can follow the show notes to learn more about Melissa. The Stone Chapel Podcast is brought to you by the Linear Theological Library and Learning Center, and our podcast is part of the Church Leaders Podcast Network. Our audio engineer and producer is Kathy Capes. Our intro and outro music is written and performed by Phil Kagi. Our partners in podcasting at CLPN, Church Leaders Podcast Network, are Jessica Mauser and Jana Firestone. Rate us and leave us a comment. E.G. Dupree says, A+. A must listen for anyone interested in exploring the depths of theology and discovering new authors and their works. Its engaging interviews, commitment to diversity, and accessibility make it a valuable resource for both theological enthusiasts and those getting started on their journey. Prepare to be inspired, challenged, and enlightened. Wow, thanks, E.G. Dupree. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.